Sector 1, the house on Laurel Drive. There was a house no one remembered building. It sat at the far end of Laurel Drive, hidden behind an iron gate rusted by time and secrets. The windows were always closed, the curtains never moved. Yet, if you passed by late at night, you'd hear something, maybe laughter, maybe crying. Or both, overlapping like two broken records trying to outplay each other. It wasn't just any house. It was the house. The one people whispered about at dinner parties before going silent. The one some swore they'd seen on TV, but could never remember when. The one with a story that didn't belong to one person, but three. Inside, the walls held memories like a courtroom holds evidence, stacked high, yellowed with age, waiting to be revisited. And every night at exactly 2:06 a.m., when the wind stopped and even the moon seemed to blink, they woke. They always woke. Sector 2, the girl on the stairs. JonBenet sat quietly at the top of the grand staircase, her legs folded under her like a doll freshly placed. Her golden hair glimmered in soft moonlight leaking through the stained glass window above. She held a small bear, frayed at the ear, one button eye missing. Her dress was pale pink, satin and lace, untouched by time, yet always just a little too clean, like it had been red once, but someone scrubbed it too hard. She didn't remember how she got there. She didn't remember leaving. But she always remembered the quiet. It was Christmas, she said aloud to no one, her voice as gentle as a child's bedtime prayer. I heard singing downstairs. Then it stopped. The house didn't answer. It never did. JonBenet stood up and floated down the stairs, her steps light, almost soundless. At the base of the staircase, she paused, always at the same spot, where the floorboard was cracked. She leaned down and pressed her ear against it. Sometimes she could hear a scream trapped inside. Why didn't they protect me? She whispered again, her voice trembling. Why did they pretend everything was okay? In the living room, an old television flickered on by itself, static buzzing as a man's voice shouted from the screen. JonBenet turned her head slowly. They're waking up too, she said. It's almost time again. Sector 3, the shadow in the mirror. The living room was large, but it always felt smaller when he was inside. OJ appeared like a shadow stitched into the fabric of the house, silent, pacing, uncertain whether he was being watched or remembered. He still wore the black gloves. Not because he needed to, but because it was the only way to feel his hands again. The television buzzed behind him, flashing images of courtrooms, flashing lights, his own face smiling, then serious, then smiling again. Every night, the loop began the same, the white Bronco driving slow, helicopters overhead, voices debating guilt or innocence like it was a game. He stood in front of the mirror above the fireplace. It showed two versions of him, the men America had loved, and the men it had judged. One looked tired. The other looked angry. You don't know what happened, he said to his reflection. None of you ever knew. His voice was low, steady, measured, like every word had gone through trial first. He turned and looked toward the hallway. She's here again, he muttered. The little girl. Always walking around like she's still looking for her mother. He didn't like the sound of her footsteps. They reminded him of a time when people still looked up to him, still wanted his autograph. Before the trial. Before the verdict. Before everything was a whisper. I didn't do it, he said, louder this time. But the mirror never argued back. It just showed his face in the gloves, and the faint image of something else behind him. Sector 4, the brothers below. Beneath the house, the basement was colder than it should have been. The air was still, thick with the weight of unspoken words and 1,000 quiet regrets. That's where Lyle and Eric Menendez sat every night, on the same two steps, facing the dark like it might eventually give them an answer. Eric always spoke first. Do you think anyone believed us? Lyle didn't answer right away. He stared at the floor, tracing cracks with his eyes. They believed what they wanted, he finally said. Not what we said. Not what happened. I didn't want to do it, Eric whispered. His voice broke every few words. But I couldn't live with him anymore. Not with the yelling, not with the things he did when the cameras were off. They rarely mentioned their parents by name. Sometimes, the candle flickered behind them, even though neither of them had lit it. Other times, the sound of the shotgun echoed faintly from the hallway, even though it had long since gone silent. They only saw the money, Lyle said. The house. The cars. But not what was inside. JonBenet's footsteps echoed above, followed by the distant static of the TV. OJ's voice murmured something to the walls. "They're all up again," Eric said, wiping his eyes. Lyle stood. "Then it's starting again. Just like every night." Sector 5, the Hall of Evidence. The center hallway of the house was lined with picture frames, but none of them held photos. Instead, each frame held evidence. A broken tiara. A pair of black gloves. A worn-out tennis sweater. A family portrait split clean down the middle. Each item floated inside its frame, suspended as if time itself was afraid to let go. JonBenet walked through the hall carefully, her fingers brushing the glass as she passed each relic. "They made me a story," she whispered. But no one listened to the right parts. She paused in front of her own frame, her little dress from that final night. "This wasn't supposed to be the ending," she said. "I was supposed to grow up." Behind her, the flicker of the television buzzed louder. "Oh." JS footsteps echoed through the corridor. "You think people care about what's true?" he asked, his voice drifting closer. "They just want someone to point at." JonBenet turned around slowly. "But the truth is still here. Isn't it?" OJ didn't answer. He looked up at the frame holding the gloves. "Truth is a luxury. Fame is a weapon." From the stairs leading to the basement, Lyle and Eric emerged into the hallway. They walked quietly, like boys still afraid of waking their father. Eric looked up at the shattered family portrait. "They took our faces and made them monsters." No one responded. They stood in silence, the four of them, as the house creaked beneath their feet. Somewhere in the walls, whispers twisted like wind in a bottle. The floor shifted slightly, an old habit of the house when it wanted attention. "It's starting again," JonBenet said, barely above a breath. Sector 6, Courtroom of the Forgotten. At the end of the hall stood a door none of them ever remembered opening. And yet, it always stood slightly ajar. Tonight, they entered together. The courtroom wasn't real, but it felt more real than anything else. Wooden benches stretched endlessly in both directions, their grain warped by the weight of judgment. A single spotlight hung over the judge's bench, though no judge ever appeared. Only the questions. On the walls were headlines, blazing, bold, cruel. Did OJ get away with murder? JonBenet's family, victims or suspects? The Menendez brothers, cold-blooded killers or abused sons? The voices came next. Disembodied, bitter, and everywhere. She was just a beauty queen. He ran, didn't he? They only cried when the cameras were on. She had rope marks. There was blood in the Bronco. They bought Rolexes the next day. Each voice stabbed the air like a gavel slamming down. JonBenet sat in the front row. They put us on trial, but never themselves. Eric stood behind her, gripping the railing tightly. We were children. OJ paced in the aisle, eyes darting between shadows. They say I'm free. But I never walked out of here. The courtroom was cold. Not from wind, but from the weight of memory. Outside the door, the hallway darkened. It always ends this way, Lyle said. JonBenet looked up at the judge's chair. It was still empty. Sector 7, Ghosts in Prime Time. The courtroom faded into static, like an old broadcast breaking apart. The house reassembled itself around them, shifting rooms like scenes from a memory none of them fully owned. Now, they stood in the den, a room filled with televisions stacked from floor to ceiling, each one playing a different version of their lives. On one screen, JonBenet waved from a stage, her smile rehearsed, perfect, haunting. On another, OJ stood behind a podium, holding a trophy in one hand, staring dead-eyed into the lens. Further down the wall, Lyle and Eric sat in expensive suits, flanked by lawyers, blinking away tears in a courtroom where no one looked at them like sons. The screen spoke louder than they ever could. They wanted a show, OJ said bitterly. They got one. They dressed me up like a doll, JonBenet added, voice distant. They told me to smile, even when I was scared. Lyle crossed his arms. When we cried, they said it was fake. They only believed the version they liked, Eric said, stepping forward. And they played it over and over, until we stopped being real people. One television fizzed, then cut to black. Then another. One by one, the screens died, leaving only their reflections in the glass, warped, flickering, almost unfamiliar. I don't think we're ghosts, JonBenet said softly. Then what are we? Lyle asked. She looked at the last screen still glowing. It showed a headline. Still unsolved. Still watching. We're memories, she said. And this house is how they remember us. Sector 8, a night that never ends. The house did not sleep. Even when the stars outside dimmed, even when time itself seemed to slow, it stayed awake, every floorboard pulsing with questions, every window reflecting more than just moonlight. That night, like every night, they followed the same path. OJ returned to the fireplace, standing in front of the mirror, muttering things only he could understand. The gloves hung heavy on his hands, soaked in weight no one could wash off. Eric wandered the kitchen, looking for food he'd never eat, opening the fridge only to find it full of silence. Lyle stood by the dining room table, counting chairs that once held a family, now just shadows. And JonBenet, she climbed back up the stairs, her little bear tucked under one arm, pausing at each step to listen. Not for footsteps, but for a voice she never heard again. Mom, she asked quietly. Are you there yet? No one ever answered. In the master bedroom, the Christmas lights flickered for a moment, then died completely. From the hallway, a soft creak came from the courtroom door. It never fully closed. Never stayed shut. Lyle walked to the front window and looked out onto Laurel Drive. There was no road. No city. Just fog, stretching endlessly, as if the world forgot where the house truly belonged. We don't get out, he said, voice low. We just repeat. Eric joined him. Until someone listens. JonBenet stood at the top of the stairs. They're still watching, she said. OJ, in the mirror, locked eyes with his other self. And the house, alive, silent, waiting, held them close. Again. Sector 9, the guests that never leave. Some nights, the house welcomed visitors, not living ones, but memories in human form. They came in flashes, as if caught between channels. A mother crying silently on a couch. A man gripping a briefcase full of evidence no one ever read. A journalist holding a microphone, eyes wide, heart colder than her voice. They think they're here to report, JonBenet whispered from behind the staircase railing, but they're just repeating what they're told. She watched as another visitor passed through the front door, an old detective, weary, clutching a folder so tightly the paper crinkled with each step. He muttered to himself, flipping through photographs that faded before his eyes. They never stay long, Eric said, standing near the grand piano. They don't even know they're part of it now. OJ entered the room, staring at the detective. He's the one who looked me in the eye. Said he believed me. Then went on TV and said the opposite. Lyle looked away. They all had their story to sell. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows like a living thing. The streetlights flickered but gave off no warmth. The visitors paced the house, some crying, others shouting. But always fading, as if the house filtered out anything that didn't belong to them. When the final visitor vanished through the back wall, the house sighed. A low groan, deep in its bones. They'll come back, JonBenet said softly. They always do. Sector 10, echoes on tape. In the study, tucked behind an old bookshelf that never collected dust, there was a reel-to-reel tape recorder. No one remembered placing it there. It was always just there, spinning slowly, endlessly playing a loop that none of them dared erase. Click. Hiss. A voice, trembling. This is the 911 call placed from the Ramsey home. Click. Buzz. If it doesn't fit, you must acquit. Click. Static. My brother and I feared for our lives. JonBenet sat cross-legged on the floor, listening. Her fingers traced the grooves in the old rug. They kept our voices, she said. But not our meaning. OJ leaned against the doorframe. They edited me until I didn't recognize myself. Lyle joined them, his face tense. They clipped out everything that mattered. Eric hovered beside the machine, watching the tape spin. What if someone hears this, all of this, but still doesn't understand? Then we keep telling it, JonBenet said. Until someone does. The tape snapped, a soft pop cutting the silence. None of them flinched. They had heard it so many times, it was like a breath in their lungs. The reel wound backward on its own. Then began again. OJ reached for the chair in the corner and slowly sat down, eyes locked on the spinning machine. You ever wonder, he said, if the tape will ever run out? No, JonBenet answered, her voice the faintest whisper. Because the world keeps recording us. Outside, the fog shifted, watching. Sector 11, the weight of waiting. The house stretched on, endless and still. Time had folded in on itself, trapping the 3 stories inside a loop that no jury, no verdict, no public opinion could ever break. JonBenet sat by the window, watching the fog curl around the trees like ghosts reaching out for something lost. Waiting is its own kind of punishment, she said softly, because you never know if what you're waiting for will come. OJ stood nearby, hands in pockets, staring at the cracked floor. I waited for a trial, for justice, for a chance to speak. But waiting turned to watching. Watching the world judge without seeing. The Menendez brothers leaned against the worn banister. Lyle spoke first, voice steady but heavy. We waited for someone to hear the truth. To believe we were not just villains. But waiting became silence. Eric nodded. We're all waiting here. Waiting for someone to understand that stories are more than headlines. That pain is more than a sound bite. JonBenet smiled faintly. Waiting for the house to open its doors. For someone to walk in and finally listen. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows softly, like a gentle knock. An invitation, or perhaps a warning. Sector 12, the door that never opens. At the far end of the house, past the courtroom and the hallway of evidence, stood a door. Painted white, with a brass knob worn smooth by years of unanswered knocks. None of them had the courage to open it. Not yet. JonBenet's hand hovered inches from the door. What if behind this door is the truth? OJ glanced over, eyes narrowing. Or what if it's something worse? Lyle and Eric exchanged looks. We don't know what's on the other side, Eric said. But maybe it's the one thing we need. The door creaked as a breeze slipped underneath. The knob turned slightly, as if inviting them in. JonBenet exhaled slowly. Maybe, it's time. The house held its breath. And the door remained closed. Sector 13, whispers behind the door. The door didn't open that night, but it whispered. Soft sounds leaked through the cracks, voices tangled with shadows, secrets folded into the grain of the wood. JonBenet pressed her ear gently to the door. She heard the faintest echo of a lullaby, distant and broken. A mother's voice. Or a memory twisted by time. OJ placed his hand on the wall, steadying himself. It's like the house is holding its breath, waiting for us to decide. Lyle whispered, what if the truth isn't something to find, but something to face? Eric nodded slowly. Maybe it's not behind the door, but inside us. Above them, the ceiling creaked, as if the house itself agreed. Somewhere far away, a clock ticked, but the sound was hollow, empty of meaning. JonBenet stepped back, tears glistening in her eyes. I'm tired of waiting in silence. OJ looked at her. Maybe silence is the loudest thing in this house. They stood together, for shadows caught between the past and the future, listening to a door that promised answers but kept them just out of reach. Sector 14, the first step. Days passed, or maybe years, it was impossible to tell. Time moved differently here, wrapped in uncertainty. But one evening, JonBenet reached for the doorknob. It was cold, colder than the night outside. Her fingers trembled, but she turned it slowly. The door creaked open, just a crack. Inside was darkness. But not empty. A faint light pulsed at the far end of the room, like a heartbeat. OJ stepped forward, breaking the silence. This feels like the moment you hold your breath for. Lyle followed, Eric close behind. The room smelled of dust and forgotten words. JonBenet took the first step inside. The others followed. And behind them, the door slowly closed. Sector 15, the Room of Truth. The room was small, almost too small to hold the weight of what waited inside. The walls were lined with mirrors, cracked, fogged, reflecting fragmented versions of themselves. In each reflection, their faces shifted, sometimes younger, sometimes older, always searching. A single light hung from the ceiling, swinging gently, casting long shadows that stretched and retracted like slow breaths. JonBenet stepped closer, voice barely audible. Is this who we really are? OJ studied the mirrors. Or who they made us to be. Lyle reached out to touch a mirror, and his hand trembled as the glass rippled like water. Eric's eyes grew wide. Every reflection is a story, but none of them tell the whole truth. A whisper filled the room, soft as a breeze through dead leaves. Truth is fragmented, until you gather the pieces. They looked at each other, understanding that this room was both a prison and a path. Sector 16, gathering the pieces. Slowly, they began to move, stepping from mirror to mirror, touching their reflections, pulling memories from the shards. JonBenet found a piece of a lullaby she barely remembered. OJ uncovered a flash of his life before the trial, a moment of laughter with his children. Lyle and Eric uncovered hidden shadows. Moments of fear and pain no one saw. Piece by piece, their fragmented selves began to come together, forming a mosaic of pain, hope, and questions. The mirrors shimmered, the light brightened. And for the long time, the house seemed to breathe a little easier. JonBenet whispered, maybe the truth isn't in the silence. OJ nodded. Maybe it's in the pieces we keep trying to find. They didn't know what awaited them beyond the door. But together, they were ready to face it. Sector 17, the doorway beyond. As the mosaic of memory settled into a fragile whole, a soft glow began to emanate from the far wall of the room. JonBenet stepped forward, her small hand reaching out toward an archway that had been hidden behind the mirrors. It wasn't a door, exactly, more a doorway, bathed in a warm, gentle light that promised answers but also demanded courage. OJ stood beside her, his voice quiet. This is what we've been waiting for. The next step. Lyle and Eric exchanged a glance, a mix of fear and hope reflected in their eyes. Together, they crossed the threshold. The light wrapped around them like a comforting embrace. Sector 18, the heart of the house. They found themselves in a room unlike any other in the house, a vast space filled with silence, yet it thrummed with a quiet energy. In the center stood a single tree, its branches bare but alive, glowing faintly in the dim light. JonBenet walked up to the tree, her fingers brushing the rough bark. It's like the heart of the house, she whispered. Growing, even when everything else is broken. OJ nodded slowly. Maybe this is where all the pain and hope meet. Lyle and Eric approached, their footsteps soft on the wooden floor. The tree seemed to pulse, a gentle rhythm like a heartbeat, steady, persistent, a reminder that even in darkness, something lives on. JonBenet looked up at the branches stretching toward the ceiling. We're part of this now. And maybe, so is the truth. Sector 19, the roots of memory. Beneath the glowing tree, roots stretched deep into the floor, twisting, tangled, reaching into the unknown. JonBenet knelt down, tracing the shapes. These roots. They hold everything. Every secret, every pain, every word left unsaid. OJ crouched beside her, voice soft. Memories don't just fade. They grow. They change the ground beneath us. Lyle and Eric sat quietly, watching the roots pulse faintly, as if alive. The house isn't just a place, Eric said. It's a record. A witness. JonBenet's eyes shimmered. And we're the ones who carry the memories, whether the world listens or not. Sector 20, the promise of dawn. For the first time, the light in the house began to shift, the soft glow of the tree blending with a distant, gentle warmth, like the first hint of dawn. JonBenet stood, her voice steady. Maybe this is not the end. Maybe it's the beginning. OJ looked toward the horizon beyond the glowing walls. A place where stories can be told without fear. Lyle and Eric nodded. Where waiting turns into moving forward. The house seemed to breathe with them, the shadows retreating just enough to reveal a path forward. And as the light grew brighter, the four of them stepped together, ready to face whatever came next, no longer trapped in silence. Sector 21, a step into light. The path ahead shimmered softly, made of light and shadow intertwined. It stretched far beyond the house's walls, a bridge between the past and what could be. JonBenet took the lead, her small step steady and sure. "We've carried this for so long," she said quietly, "but now it's time to let it go." OJ followed, his gaze fixed forward. The world outside still remembers. But maybe now they'll hear us differently. Lyle and Eric walked beside them, no longer just shadows of fear but figures of strength. "We're not just stories," Eric said. "We're people." The house behind them seemed to hum with approval. The silence was no longer a cage but a space for something new. Sector 22, the voices finally heard. As they reached the edge of the path, voices began to rise, not loud, but clear. Whispers turned into words, words into sentences. Outside the house, the world was waking. JonBenet smiled softly. "They're listening. Even if they don't know it yet." OJ nodded. "Truth is patient. It waits for the right moment." Lyle looked up at the widening light. "Maybe this time, we won't be forgotten." Eric whispered, "Maybe this time, the silence will break." Together, they stepped beyond the house, into the dawn, into the possibility of peace. Sector 23, the dawn beyond silence. The dawn light spilled gently over Laurel Drive, softening the edges of the house that had held so many secrets. Outside, the world moved on, but inside, something had shifted. JonBenet breathed deeply. "It feels like a new day. Not just outside, but here, inside." OJ looked toward the horizon, the weight on his shoulders feeling just a little lighter. "Maybe this is what we've been waiting for all along." Lyle and Eric stood side by side, watching the first rays touch the tree's glowing branches. "Hope isn't gone," Lyle said quietly. "It was just waiting." Sector 24, the house that listens. Though the house was silent once more, it no longer felt cold or empty. It was a place that listened, finally. JonBenet looked around, her eyes filled with a quiet peace. "The stories we carry don't have to trap us anymore." OJ nodded. "We're still here. But now, we're more than whispers." Lyle and Eric smiled faintly. "And maybe, someday, people will understand." Outside, the fog began to lift, revealing a path bathed in morning light. The house stood quietly on Laurel Drive, waiting no longer. Sector 25, the weight of stories. The house seemed to breathe with them, no longer a prison but a keeper of stories, stories that refused to be forgotten. JonBenet sat on the windowsill, looking out over the fading fog. "Our stories are heavy," she said softly. "But they carry truth." OJ leaned against the wall, his voice steady. "People want simple answers, but life isn't simple." Lyle and Eric stood nearby, nodding. "Truth is complicated. It's messy and painful. Yet, in that messiness, there was strength." Sector 26, moving forward together. The four figures gathered in the heart of the house, where the glowing tree still pulsed softly. JonBenet smiled faintly. "We're not alone anymore." OJ looked around. "Together, maybe we can change how people see us." Lyle and Eric reached out their hands. "We're ready," Eric said. The house shimmered with light as they stood side by side, ready to step beyond the silence and into a future shaped by understanding. Sector 27, the unseen witnesses. Outside the house, the world spun in chaos and quiet alike. News cycles moved on. New stories took their place. But inside Laurel Drive, the house held the unseen witnesses, the memories etched into its walls, the echoes that no one could silence. JonBenet sat quietly, her gaze distant but steady. "They forget, but this house remembers." OJ nodded slowly. "It's a keeper of secrets, of truths too heavy to be spoken aloud." Lyle and Eric shared a look. "And we are part of that memory now." Sector 28, the quiet resolve. The house was no longer a prison but a refuge, a place where past and present met with quiet resolve. JonBenet stood tall, her voice calm. "Maybe our stories don't need to end in sorrow." OJ smiled faintly. "Maybe they can be a bridge." Lyle and Eric stepped forward together. A way for others to understand. The light in the house softened, wrapping around them like a gentle embrace, a promise that even in darkness, there could be hope. Sector 29, a new perspective. The house on Laurel Drive was no longer just a place of echoes, it had become a beacon. A symbol of stories waiting to be heard. JonBenet looked out a fogged window, her eyes tracing shapes in the mist. People see us as headlines, but we're more than that. OJ leaned back against the wall, hands clasped. They want closure. But some stories don't close. They evolve. Lyle nodded. Our truth isn't simple, but it's ours. Eric smiled faintly. And now, maybe it will be understood. Sector 30, into the light. The fog outside began to lift, revealing the street beyond Laurel Drive bathed in soft morning light. JonBenet stepped forward, feeling the warmth on her face. Maybe this is the beginning of something new. OJ followed, eyes steady. A chance for peace, for all of us. Lyle and Eric joined them, shoulders squared, ready to move beyond the past. Together, they stepped into the light, leaving the house behind, but carrying its stories with them. Sector 31, the quiet aftermath. The house stood still now, silent but not empty. JonBenet looked back one last time, her eyes full of a gentle sadness and hope. We've carried so much, but now it's time to rest. OJ nodded slowly. Rest doesn't mean forgetting. It means finding peace. Lyle and Eric lingered near the door, ready to leave but reluctant to let go completely. We walk forward, Eric said, but this place will always be a part of us. The house seemed to breathe a final sigh, its walls no longer heavy but lighter, as if freed from the weight it once held. Sector 32, the path forward. Outside, the sky brightened as the first true light of day broke through the lingering fog. JonBenet, OJ, Lyle, and Eric stood together on the threshold, not as ghosts trapped in history, but as souls ready to live beyond the stories told about them. JonBenet smiled softly. This isn't the end. It's a new beginning. OJ added, a chance to rewrite what people think they know. Lyle and Eric exchanged hopeful glances. Together, we moved forward. And as they stepped beyond the house on Laurel Drive, the door closed gently behind them, the past finally at rest, but never forgotten. Sector 33. Reflections in the glass. Outside the house, the world moved on, but reflections remained, faint images captured in the glass windows, moments frozen in time. JonBenet watched her reflection ripple softly. We are more than memories trapped behind glass. OJ stood beside her, his image wavering but steady. Our stories stretch beyond these walls. Lyle and Eric joined them, their reflections merging into one collective shadow. Together, they faced the dawn, ready to embrace what came next. Sector 34, the house remembers. Inside, the house stood quiet but alive, a guardian of stories, a keeper of truths whispered between its walls. JonBenet's voice echoed softly, the house remembers what the world tries to forget. OJ added, it holds the silence and the noise, the questions without answers. Lyle and Eric nodded in agreement. And it waits for those willing to listen. Outside, the morning sun painted the house in warm light, promising new beginnings. Sector 35. The weight of shadows. Shadows stretched long across the floorboards, carrying with them the weight of untold stories. JonBenet moved slowly through the house, touching the walls as if to soothe the echoes trapped within. They don't see us, she whispered. But we've never been invisible. OJ nodded, his gaze distant. The shadows hold more than darkness, they hold truth. Lyle and Eric followed quietly, understanding that the past was not just behind them, but woven into the very fabric of this place. Sector 36, the light in the silence. A soft glow began to fill the corners of the rooms, illuminating the silence with warmth. JonBenet smiled faintly. Even silence has a voice. OJ looked toward the windows, where light began to break through. Lyle and Eric stood together, ready to carry the light beyond the house. Together, they stepped forward, no longer prisoners of the past, but bearers of its stories. Sector 37, Echoes of Understanding. The house seemed to hum softly, as if acknowledging the change within its walls. JonBenet spoke quietly, maybe the echoes we hear aren't just reminders of what was lost. OJ nodded slowly, but invitations to be heard. Lyle and Eric shared a glance of cautious hope. Together, they moved toward the front door, the threshold between past and future. Sector 38, beyond the threshold. The door stood before them, no longer a barrier but a promise. JonBenet reached out and touched the knob, feeling warmth instead of cold. OJ smiled gently. This is the moment. Lyle and Eric flanked her, stepping forward as one. They crossed the threshold into a world ready to listen, ready to understand. The house behind them grew quiet, peaceful at last. Sector 39, the first breath of freedom. Stepping beyond the threshold, the air felt different, lighter, filled with possibility. JonBenet took a deep breath, her voice soft but sure. We're finally free, or at least, closer than ever. OJ nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon. Freedom isn't just leaving, it's being understood. Lyle and Eric followed, their steps steady, carrying years of pain and hope alike. Behind them, the house on Laurel Drive stood silent, no longer a prison but a resting place. Sector 40, into the new day. The sun rose fully now, bathing the world in golden light. JonBenet smiled gently. A new day, a new story. OJ looked forward. One where the truth can breathe. Lyle and Eric walked beside her. And where silence no longer holds us. Together, they moved forward, into the dawn, into hope, and into peace. Sector 41, the quiet reunion. The four stood together, the morning light wrapping around them like a gentle embrace. JonBenet looked at her companions and smiled softly. After all this time, we're still together. OJ nodded. Bound not just by pain, but by the hope we carry. Lyle reached out, touching Eric's shoulder. We've been through darkness, but this is our moment. The house behind them remained still, its silence finally peaceful. Sector 42, the promise kept. As the sun climbed higher, they walked toward the horizon, leaving the house, and its memories, behind. JonBenet's voice was steady. We carry the past with us, but it doesn't define us. OJ smiled faintly. We're more than the stories told. Lyle and Eric's footsteps echoed softly. And now, we make our own path. Together, they stepped into the light, toward a future shaped by truth, understanding, and peace. Sector 43, the long road ahead. The journey wasn't over, but the path was clearer now. They walked forward with cautious hope. JonBenet's voice was steady. We carry scars, but also strength. OJ nodded, the world may never fully understand, but we keep moving. Lyle and Eric glanced at each other. Together, we face whatever comes. Sector 44, the light within. As the sun climbed higher, their steps grew lighter. The past still lingered, but it no longer weighed them down. Sector 45, healing steps. With each step forward, the weight of old stories felt lighter. JonBenet glanced back once, then smiled. Healing isn't forgetting, it's choosing peace. OJ nodded thoughtfully. It's a journey no one else can take for us. Lyle and Eric exchanged hopeful looks. We're walking that path now. JonBenet smiled softly. There's light inside us that no darkness can touch. OJ looked ahead, calm and determined. And that light will guide us. Lyle and Eric walked side by side. A light that will never fade. Sector 46, the new horizon. Ahead, the sky opened wide, painted with soft hues of dawn. JonBenet breathed deeply. This horizon holds promise. OJ looked toward the light. A future not defined by pain. Lyle and Eric stepped confidently. A future of hope. Together, they moved forward, toward whatever came next. Sector 47, quiet resolve. The four moved steadily forward, the past fading but never forgotten. JonBenet's voice was calm. We carry our stories, but they don't carry us. OJ nodded slowly. Strength grows in the quiet moments. Lyle and Eric shared a look of determination. And in each other. Sector 48, steps into tomorrow. The light ahead grew brighter, a gentle promise of tomorrow. JonBenet smiled softly. Every step is new. OJ added, every breath a chance. Lyle and Eric walked beside them. Together, we face the future. And with that, they stepped into the morning light, ready for what was to come. Sector 49, the bridge between past and present. The road ahead stretched wide and open, a bridge connecting what had been with what could be. JonBenét's voice was steady and gentle. We've walked through shadows, but now we step into the light. OJ nodded, his gaze calm and clear. The past shaped us, but it does not define us. Lyle and Eric matched their steps to the rhythm of hope. Together, we carry the future. Sector 50, the promise of peace. The dawn light wrapped around them like a soft blanket, warm and reassuring. JonBenét smiled, her voice filled with quiet strength. Peace isn't the absence of pain, it's the presence of understanding. OJ added thoughtfully, and the courage to keep moving forward. Lyle and Eric shared a hopeful glance. We're ready to live beyond the stories told about us. Together, they stepped fully into the new day, toward a future shaped by truth, healing, and peace.